Good evening. I'm Dr. Mahendra Carpen, interventional cardiologist and head of medical services at the Georgetown Public Hospital, and I'm the team leader for the group that looks after the COVID-19 patients who are admitted to the hospital. I am lucky to be supported by a very wonderful team that includes doctors, nurses, technicians, pharmacists, attendants, and everyone that works together to take care of our fellow Guyanese patients when they are admitted to hospital with this dreaded COVID-19 diagnosis. By the time we get to see these patients, they're already quite sick. And so therefore, we are always in a battle to try and save the lives of these persons. As you follow the news, you would see that we don't always win, but it's not from a lack of effort. Every single team member has to put in extra work, extra effort to make sure that we get the best outcomes for our patients. Now, most times we win, but there are some times that we lose the battle, but it's not because of a lack of effort or a lack of enthusiasm. The conditions under which my team functions have constantly been improving, and we constantly work towards the betterment of the environment in which we work and the patients to whom we are obligated. So today I want to talk to you about, in particular, two treatments that have been showing some progress. And one I would have spent some time talking to you about in episode number 2 yesterday. And this one is ivermectin. And I can tell you that this has been around for a while. And this is one of the safer medications that are available. And it is part of a protocol that was developed in South Florida that we use with some success in our patients. By the time these people are admitted to hospital, as you know, they are quite ill. We don't admit mildly sick patients. They have to be at least moderately or severely ill to be admitted to the hospital. If we were to admit every mildly affected person, we would run out of healthcare resources across the world, not just Guyana. So as we evolved into this pandemic, we got to a stage where we no longer needed to institutionally quarantine everyone who was positive, because it was just simply impossible to do so. There are not enough resources, there are not enough quarantine beds, there are not enough isolation facilities in no country in the world. So we developed the appropriate criteria for home isolation, home quarantine, etc. So today, when we talk about this drug ivermectin, it is not something that we are just experimenting with in Guyana. We have some evidence that points us towards its use, that it offers benefits to our patients. And it is just given over a 3-day period and 3 separate doses, and sometimes even 2 days. It is available in Guyana, it is available at the Ministry of Health and the Vector Control section, and therefore we are able to use it to treat our patients. The next thing I want to spend some time and talk to you about, but before we go there, how does this drug actually act? Well, for the virus to become dangerous to you, once you inhale it or it gets into your lungs or your mouth, it has to then penetrate your cells. And in order for it to do so, it needs to attach itself to a protein that then transports it into the cell. We think, and we have some evidence to suggest, that the drug ivermectin blocks the attachment and the transportation of the virus into the cell, and therefore it prevents all the other effects that the virus can have on the human body. One of the things that we embarked on very early in the process of managing COVID-19 in Guyana was to explore the use of convalescent plasma. Now, this is not new. In several pandemics that the world would have faced before, long ago, from as far back as the Spanish flu era, the use of convalescent plasma had been quite intriguing and has gained a lot of interest. Now that we are back in another pandemic, let me explain to you a little bit about the science behind using convalescent plasma. When a patient becomes exposed or infected with this virus, or in fact any infection, whether it's bacterial or viral, the body tries to defend itself. And there are several ways in which it can do that, but let us focus on the immune response. The immune response means that your body starts to create its own soldiers to fight against this invading or infecting particle. And this process for COVID-19 starts about day 7 or so. You start to produce the first set of antibodies, the IgM, and then later on your body produces longer term antibodies called IgG, like after the second week or so. So if we have a patient who has COVID-19, they will start to produce these antibodies. And when this patient recovers, the antibodies are still present in their system. It's still present in their blood. So the science behind it now is to isolate and find these sick patients who are now recovered and they no longer have symptoms for at least 14 days, and you ask them to donate their blood. And we have had a good response in the donor pool. People will then donate their blood. The blood bank and the technical people at that institution then processes and sterilize and makes it clean so that it can be transfused from one person to the other. Now, we just can't transfuse from any person to any other person. There must be something called a compatibility match. Like blood group A can only be transfused to blood group B, just like any other transfusion. You want to make sure that the person who is receiving the transfusion will not develop an abnormal reaction to the transfusion. So you're transfusing plasma, which is a component of whole blood. So the blood bank, for example, will take a pint of blood. If you've ever donated blood, you'll know exactly what I mean. They will take that and then separate the cells, which are the red blood cells, from the plasma, which appears kind of yellowish. And that plasma is then transfused safely into the recipient. So there's 2 persons involved, a donor who gives the blood and a recipient who receives the blood. And this is what we did from the early stages of this infection. And we have had a fairly good result. We have demonstrated several things. One, we were among the first in the Caribbean to do so. And we're very proud of that record. And particularly the team at the Georgetown Public Hospital must be given credit for the work that they put in, not just taking blood, but making sure that everything is written down in a proper protocol. It's done according to, standardized protocols that we borrowed some from other established institutions. We refined it, we made it adaptable to our local circumstances. And so we demonstrated that this can be done safely in Guyana. The blood collection, the blood processing, the transfusion into the recipient, and then the patient's response to the therapy. So at all levels, we have experienced success. We have not had any adverse reaction, meaning a transfusion reaction, where someone receives a sample of convalescent plasma that they reacted badly to, and that is something that we are very pleased about, because sometimes even with the most diligent screening process, we may still end up with the occasional adverse reaction from the recipient. So we were lucky and pleased that we were able to have no adverse transfusion-related reactions in those who would have received the convalescent plasma. And so far, since we started a couple months ago, we've been able to transfuse about 10 persons with convalescent plasma. And we were able, apart from the first patient who was critically ill, and this was a last-ditch effort where we use convalescent plasma on what we call a compassionate basis. Apart from that one person, we have not had any other transfusion, any other deaths surrounding the period of transfusion. We have had several patients who have recovered quite nicely and were able to be discharged from hospital. And we have had patients, however, who still had prolonged hospitalization even after receiving 2 units of the convalescent plasma. Ideally, we would like to measure the antibody load for each unit of plasma that we are transfusing into patients. But because we do not have that ability, we can assume that there is enough of a concentration in 2 units, and based on our epidemiological data from around the world, that we use that and to give the patients 2 units of transfusion, and we're assuming that they have in those 2 units sufficient antibodies to help them. So who are the patients we actually use this in? We use this in patients. One, they have to be compatible. They have to acknowledge and give us permission to use this therapy in them. And after informed consent, remember, everything that we do in medicine, we try to get informed consent. That means that you get a patient's permission to give them the treatment that you think is going to help them. In certain circumstances, when the patients themselves cannot give permission because they are unable to for one reason or the other, we'll find the most responsible person for that patient. For example, a spouse, a parent, a child, a first-degree relative who has the authority to be able to make that decision. And so we have had good success using this therapy, and we are very pleased to have been among the first in the Caribbean to offer this to our patients. What are the challenges that we have experienced with this? The 2 main challenges are, one, there's a diminishing donor pool, and perhaps that is part of our own shortcoming with education and public awareness. But hopefully through this program, patients who would have recovered from the COVID-19 infection may consider donating their plasma to help others. And those patients who are most in need of it are those who are showing difficulties in recovering and are not getting better as fast as we would like them to. And so therefore those persons are in need of convalescent plasma, and we'd like to have more donors. Additionally, we want to have a wider selection of persons donating so we could meet the compatibility needs that we have. Because you have to make sure that you have enough group A, group B, AB, all the other compatibility factors. So I hope this would have shed some light on 2 of the main therapies that we are using in Guyana. And I want to thank you for listening and thank you for watching. And I hope that you would have learned something, and we're all better off for having had this program today. Thank you and good night.